Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrived by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 242, we sit down with Mark Moffett, an entomologist, explorer, author, and photographer whose work has taken him around the world, studying complex societies created by animals, from ants in the deserts to elephants in Africa, wolves in Yellowstone, bats in Trinidad, sea turtles along the Georgia coast. Mark has spent decades observing animals in their natural environments and asking what holds their societies together. Known for combining scientific research with a remarkable sense of adventure, Mark has explored some of the world's most remote environments, often spending weeks or months patiently observing animals in the wild. His discoveries have appeared in major scientific and popular publications, and his photography has helped him bring the hidden worlds of animals to audiences far beyond the scientific community. In our conversation, we begin with Mark's childhood and the experiences that first sparked his fascination with the natural world. From there, we explore his many years of fieldwork, the discoveries that have stayed with him, what animal societies can teach us about our own communities, and what he hopes people will see differently about the natural world after looking at it through his lens. So I hope you enjoy episode 242 with Mark Moffett. This episode was recorded August 6, 2026. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. It's really great to have you on today.
Hey, Chris. Wonderful to be here. Greenport is a place full of people and history, so it's great that you're even doing this podcast. It's a wonderful thing.
Thank you so much. And so now with you, I'd like to just start off in the beginning. If you could share a little bit about yourself growing up before we get into your research, your childhood, and even what sparked your curiosity in the natural world.
Yeah, well, what sparked my curiosity is the same thing that sparked many people's curiosity in the natural world, and that is when we were all in diapers, and I mean when we were a few months old, down there in the dirt, we were all watching ants, and we thought they were cool. And most people grew out of it, or they were forced to grow out of it by being told that they should be doing other things. But I showed commitment. I just kept watching ants. And I find them fascinating for the same reason that a 2-year-old finds them fascinating. They're doing all kinds of cool stuff.
Mm-hmm. What area did you grow up in?
Oh, yeah, it was initially in my backyard in Salida, Colorado, in central Colorado. We moved when I was 6, and I lived after that in Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. I kept looking for critters and exploring the creeks and backwoods every place we lived in these small towns. My dad was a small town minister.
Mm-hmm. And did they have any influence on you in terms of your background in the nature and environment, or?
My dad and mom, yeah. Well, they both were people who loved nature, so we went camping. It was one of those old-style tents where if you touched the side, the water would just pour in, so you couldn't touch the tent. I think they got rid of that style long ago. Mm-hmm. But I remember going camping in various spots. We'd drive across different parts of the U.S., and so I was always looking for critters. My dad, as I said, was a minister. And you might think I was rebelling by getting eventually a PhD in evolutionary biology, but he was equally feisty about like evolution and everything else. So we were just in simpatico even as we both got older. And it was fun to talk to him about all these kinds of things. So it was an interplay back and forth, a good interplay with mom and dad. So that helped quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. And What about going through school? Were there any teachers or mentors at that time into middle school or high school?
Not really. My biology teachers were terrible. I was eventually dropped out of high school, but I was already knew these researchers, so I started helping them, and I got into a small liberal arts college called Beloit College, and there were a number of professors that guided me a bit, but I particularly was enamored with the researchers I had met on the sly, because you see, as a 12-year-old, I joined the Wisconsin Herpetological Society. It was the grand opening that I went to, the very first meeting of snake, lizard, and frog people, turtles too. And, I went there with a fellow I knew from this town where I lived, who had pet reptiles all over the place. And so we went up to Milwaukee, and we were all excited. I was the young one in this little car full of mostly older gentlemen who were all very excited because there was going to be a belly dancer with a snake. And they wanted the snake to be small, focus on the belly dancer, and I wanted to see a really big snake. So I was we were contrasting our points of view about snakes and the universe right there. And we went there, and we stopped by one member's home, and she gave us a pie made out of thistles, and she had giant tortoises in the backyard, and I thought, these are my people. So I became obsessed with nature, as I said, and found that there are other people who had that obsession too, and I just went with it. But mostly in terms of the folks who I admired, there were these researchers who I met at the Milwaukee Public Museum, Max Nickerson, who studied hellbenders, a giant salamander, who, while I was in college, invited me down to Costa Rica to collect venomous snakes and other critters. And my parents had never left the U.S., and, were a little suspicious of this whole idea, but they let me go, and I wrangled snakes and caught caimans, the crocodiles, and all kinds of things with these guys. We stayed at a small B&B in Costa Rica and had caimans, 6-foot caimans under our hotel room beds, tied up so that they couldn't escape. The hotel management refused to clean our rooms. That was not the most helpful thing, but what are you going to do?
Yeah. There was the major figure, E.O. Wilson. Was he someone that I thought I remember you mentioning, meeting him?
Oh yeah,
and getting.
Well, I had joined the book club, science book club, when I was 14 or 15, and got 3 books for $1. One of them was a book called The Insect Societies by Edward O. Wilson, who was a very famous, even at that time, Harvard professor. But I had no idea, being from a small school, and that Harvard was a big deal. So I thought this was the coolest book of all time, and I wrote him a letter, and he responded to drop by if I got to Boston, and I dropped by because I was a part of a class in Cape Cod on conservation, and so I dropped by Harvard, and he opened the door, and I gave him a big handshake, double handshake with both hands, and called him Ed. And I heard afterwards, when I eventually became his graduate student, that you should only call him Ed after you get your PhD, but I had already started. And so we got down on the floor of his office and started looking at pictures of ants, because he studies ants. And it was just like being with another kid. And this is what I've realized through the years. I most admire those people who retain that childlike curiosity, coming almost from birth, watching ants in our diapers, and just continuing through our lives with that joy in finding new things that we had as small children. And he was one of those.
Yes. And you mentioned snakes and traveling in Costa Rica, and then being fascinated with ants early on. Were you always interested in a wide variety of animals at that time, or did you ever, like, would you eventually focus more on ants later on in your career?
Oh, I was interested in all kinds of critters.
Critters,
I
yeah.
was interested in the underdog mostly, which are things smaller than a dog.
Mm.
And I could have continued to study snakes and frogs and other things, but there's a couple reasons I didn't. One is you have to preserve specimens to do scientific research. You're out in the field, you're studying some frog, you have to inject them with formalin and put them in the museum. And I wasn't fond of doing that with frogs, but after a day of being bitten by ants, no problem. I just throw a few of them in the alcohol and get my sweet revenge. And besides, with ants, there's no problem with killing a few of them because they're all kamikazes anyway. They're fighting for their queen, basically. So they're constantly trying to bite you and getting murdered as a result anyway. So I didn't have any guilt with ants. And the other reason to study ants, I found, is that ants are always doing something. You know, you can study, I mean, I've known Jane Goodall and a bunch of other primatologists, and you can go out and study those animals, but you know what you'll do is you'll find yourselves sitting there all day and the monkeys will be scratching themselves and looking at you, and you'll be going, oh my God, is it 4 o'clock already? They'll have some skirmishes here and there, but ants are constantly doing things. They're very busy, so you can get all kinds of interesting information in even a few days. And then in your spare time, you can go out and look for your chimpanzees or your howler monkeys or your orangutans. So I developed that strategy, and I've always enjoyed looking and continuing to look for all these other creatures that I loved when I was a kid, and ants basically allow me to do that.
And was that something, was there a moment where you realized that you were interested also in the society, in human societies, and how those societies function compared to ants as well?
Yeah, well, as I traveled around the world, of course, I'm constantly coming to different societies and seeing how people lived, and I don't mean just nations. I've lived with hunter-gatherers like the San in Africa. I've visited the Australian Aborigines and other cultural groups, and I remember one of my vivid moments traveling first was in college. I not only studied these snakes in Costa Rica, but I was taken on as an assistant for a person looking at beetles in the Andes Mountains. And we traveled for 6 months to very remote places. This job should have gone to a graduate student, but I was an undergraduate willing to take this job on. And we were in very remote parts of Peru, particularly, Ecuador as well, and a bit in Bolivia, and looking for these beetles, insects. And we would drive, 14,000 plus feet high, as high as any mountain in the continental U.S., or even higher. And in the distance, you'd see some mossy green. And as you get closer, you'd realize it was a village covered with moss. And the people in that village, all dressed in a certain way, had certain kinds of hats and ways of conducting themselves, and a different language in many cases. And I realized all these different communities were basically only recently brought together. These were different cultural groups, societies from the past. And as I go around the world looking at these societies of humans and thinking about the societies I see for ants and other creatures, I began to realize that there were some really interesting questions about how certain kinds of animals and humans form these kinds of groups. They're groups where the clear sense of belonging, you know who belongs and who doesn't. Each member knows who belongs and who doesn't, and this sense lasts through the generations, and there's usually some kind of territory. And those species that do that tend to form groups that are central to their identities. It's about identity in the social psychology sense. And most biologists don't think about that. They think about networks, how animals interact, but they don't think about these groups with these boundaries and how this matters to them. And that became sort of a theme I've developed, and I've continued to work in social psychology, and I go every year to a social psychology conference, as well as other conferences in anthropology and so forth. And I'm trying to basically build bridges between the sciences and how we look at societies, what they mean, how they stay together over time, and what can cause them to break apart.
No, that's interesting because, like you said, I think what we've seen in the past more where you would see people studying more how ants live as a community in a whole instead of looking at the larger picture and, like you said, boundaries as a whole, instead of just seeing how, like the queen ant and how the network works, but outside of that, how they might interact with other.
Yeah, well, ants are an extreme case. Ants are what you could call extreme nationalists. They do not do very well with any outsiders. They have colony borders, and those are absolutely maintained. Anybody from another colony that comes along is either killed or you run away as fast as possible if they're potentially a dangerous enemy. And so ants do not have the capacity for international relations like humans do, at least within the same species. And that's true, as it turns out. Basically, I started to explore. I got a Templeton grant 3 or 4 years ago and began to explore the different kinds of societies that exist among other vertebrate animals in situations where comparisons to humans might actually be instructive in some way. And there are quite a few examples out there. There are the savanna elephants that form what are called cores, which have a number of females and the young, and the males don't really belong to the society. They come and go. They flirt with the ladies when they're in the mood and this sort of thing. Other species include lion prides and wolf packs, and I've managed to, with this funding, visit researchers working on these kinds of species to talk about how their societies function over time and what causes them to eventually fail or break apart. And one of the things I discovered, or one of my conclusions at least, is that societies are always ephemeral. We like to think a society can last forever, but societies eventually break down, just like individuals, and form a new generation of societies. And the fundamental thing that happens, in my view, is that the members of the society no longer feel that they belong together. There's a sense of not being part of the society anymore, this whole sense of identity. It's the idea of turning the familiar into the foreign. Once some individuals were seen as everyday individuals, and then there's a break-off point when they're treated as outsiders. And this happened to Jane Goodall, famously back in the 1970s. She was studying her chimpanzees in Gumby, and there were, friends and enemies, but they're all out there mixed together into the distance as far as she was concerned. And then basically virtually one day, that society split. She didn't actually know what had happened at first, but former friends turned against each other and would even kill each other. And this kind of splitting, which led to the two groups separating permanently, is something you see, throughout the history of all kinds of societies, including humans with civil wars and so forth. And I think it's a really important thing to find out what happens in our minds and in the minds of these other creatures when the familiar turns into the foreign, when we no longer want to be together. And we see this as a stress in societies all the time, of course, and what keeps those societies together over time or causes them to eventually fragment, and to allow that to happen without, serious disruption and death is the real question to me.
Yes.
We're getting into deep stuff when we could be just talking about ants, though, Chris.
No, but You mentioned the elephants in Africa, and you studied wolves in Yellowstone, bats in Trinidad, the rainforest, sea turtles. Um, how did your research take you down so many different paths, and what do you think ties all these studies together? I think we've kind of touched on that a bit with some of the similarities between the humans and animals.
Yeah, well, there's a guy, Howard Gardner, who's now become a friend of mine. He's a psychologist at Harvard who talks about modes of creativity.
Hmm.
And I'm not the most brilliant guy in the world, but what I do have is what he would call a synthesizing mind. I tend to think across things. So I'm not sitting there grinding. I have ground data to details month after month for some of my research, but my main outlet seems to be to find connections between things. So I'm
Hmm.
always trying to find ways of figuring out how psychologists look at human psychology and how we can actually learn from that to understand better something like a wolf. Because
Hmm.
people studying wolves, which include some really amazing folks, nevertheless, people at Yellowstone, which I've worked with, I don't study the wolves myself, but I go there and see Dan Stoller and Kira Cassidy and others. And we talk about how wolves' sense of identity changes over time, who they allow into their
Hmm.
packs, which aren't necessarily their relatives, but become part of that pack permanently. How those memberships actually drive wolf societies, in this case packs, through these generations. And they've been studying quite a few generations at
Hmm.
Yellowstone, for example.
Yes. And I think you mentioned one expedition in, was it in the Andes or Costa Rica? But was there a time when you were observing animals in the wild? Was there one expedition or field experience that has stayed with you over the years? It's probably a lot.
Well, there are quite a few moments, but one of my things is I have and I think it pays in terms of finding a niche in science to have sort of a unique way of looking at the world. Einstein had his way of looking at the world that no one else could match. And so my tiny little way of doing that is, in fact, by seeing things that are tiny as huge. And so as a child, I never saw ants as tiny. I saw them as towering. I saw them as you might in the Sigourney Weaver in Aliens. They were tower and they were powerful things. And my view was like an airplane looking down at them, but I did not see them as tiny, you see. And that came to the fore. And that is a very useful point of view because we are too driven by the tininess of them to think that they're inconsequential, that they can't do things and so forth. But that view is driven home to me, my own perspective on it, when I was in Thailand and I was following a trail, a highway really, of what I call the marauder ants, a species I was working on. And there are hundreds of ants rushing by on this trail in this heavy leaf litter, and I'm down on my hands and knees following them up a slope, trying to figure out where the nest is. And they have very long trails. So it was yard after yard, and it took me quite a while. And I got up to the top of the hill, and there's a dipterocarp tree, which is one of the giant trees of Southeast Asia. And at the base of the tree is the nest. I can see it's the nest. I'm really excited. And I'm suddenly look up, and there's an elephant standing overhead. And I can tell you, it is very disruptive to your brain to suddenly realize that there's an elephant directly over your head, looking at me as I would look at an ant. And I'm just thinking of this kind of perspective all the time now. And I survived that because luckily in Thailand, the elephants are kind of skitterish around people. They get killed often enough that this one just backed away and went into the forest and let me be. I might not have been as lucky in India. But, that kind of perspective, forgetting size and scale and looking at the world and all these different things in it without feeling you're superior because you're, for example, large, is something I think about all the time. And ants do have tiny brains, but they do a heck of a lot with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting seeing you following the ants and them probably looking at you like an elephant, and then by the time you get following them, and then you have this other animal that's looking at you probably like an ant.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah, the ants that this marauder ants I was following at the time, they have the rush of the ants along this highway, and along the borders of the highway are the old women. Mm-hmm. Okay, in humans, it's the young males that are the fighters. In ants, it's the older ladies. First of all, ants are basically all female because the males don't really matter too much. Okay. Males have basically a couple of functions in ants. They have sex and they die. There's really nothing else males do in the ants. So we'll forget the ants. But the elderly workers, the females, are the ones that stand along the borders of the trail, and they protect it. And they're looking up at me, and you can see them there, and they're often like missing an antennae or a leg, and they're kind of crippled, but they're still going to go for me if I get too close. Damn it, let me get this guy. So I that was not my attitude towards the elephant. No, I was much more shy than these ants, but I can just see them now watching me way overhead, weighing, millions of times more than they do, but still going to give it the good college try to see if they can scare me away.
It doesn't matter. They don't care.
Yeah.
You've probably gotten bitten quite a few times.
Oh yeah. I always tell people they're love bites. It's all right.
Oh, love bites.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite species of ants?
Well, I always have to say that it's the next one I'm going to be looking for. Otherwise, I'm stuck in a rut. I can't have a favorite. But, basically my favorites are the ones, well, there are a number of different favorites. I can't really say. The ants have a lot of similarities to humans. And that's these kinds of trends that I see, this is synthesizing how you look at, say, ants, is my favorite thing to do. And certain ants are much more like humans than chimpanzees are. We think of chimpanzees, they're closely related to us, but if chimpanzees did not look like a primate, if there were something else, you would not naturally think of them as being like humans. The males force sex on the females. They don't have couples for life. They're constantly screaming and rushing around and so forth. And we do a little of that, but it's just insane. They don't get anything done. For all this energy, the anthropologists talk about primates having social complexity, but I don't see anything happening out of it. What are they doing at the end of the day except arguing and screaming and running about? With the same kind of energy, ants do all kinds of stuff that are very familiar to us. They have highways and infrastructure. They have complex division of labor. They have assembly lines. They have all kinds of teamwork. They have fully developed agriculture in the leafcutter ants. They have warfare in a way that's very complex and has a lot of the strategies of human warfare. They have slaveries. They'd have to deal with public health issues. I can tell you, no chimpanzee worries about public health issues. They're throwing their excrement around and doing all kinds of shit.
Yeah.
But, ants actually have, in very large societies, have whole teams that are devoted to keeping everything clean and keeping the whole colony disease-free. And why is this that ants have ended up being so much like us, even though their brains are so small? Well, the thing is that ants have societies, in many cases, of hundreds of thousands or millions of individuals. Chimpanzees just have a few dozen individuals. Once you have millions of individuals, you got to get laborers to the right place or everything falls apart. No one gets fed. You got to get all these things organized. You have to have traffic rules. And so different kinds of ants have different traffic rules along their trails. They have to have these highway systems that are efficient to getting to the right places for food, and they have to work that out. So all these things have to happen not necessarily requiring a large brain, but they still are things we recognize as smart solutions to problems. And so that's what fascinates me about ants.
Yes.
That was a long digression from whatever your question was.
No, that was really interesting. But also you had, I think before we started, you had mentioned the New York Times. You had one of your discoveries about ants even made the pages there. Could you tell us about that story behind the discovery and what's significant?
Oh, yeah, the New York Times kindly put a small article together on something I discovered actually a few years ago, and I only got around recently to publishing it. And this is what I'm going to say about discoveries, first of all. Discoveries are never what you set out to do. And I've talked to people who've gotten grants in different fields and whatnot, and usually the things that made them famous are never the reason that they got the grant. It was something that they found along the way. And for me, discoveries are things that happen when you have time between things, when your brain is in meltdown mode in the middle of the rainforest. You've been hiking all day and you squat down to take a rest, and you look over to one side and you see something cool. That's when I make discoveries. You see something because your mind focuses on something unexpected. And this discovery was made when I was getting my cup of joe in the morning in Arizona, near a research station, and I looked down and I saw ants that seemed to be doing something bizarre. And these little ants were climbing up on a bigger species of ant, a different kind of ant, and they seemed to be licking and nibbling all over them. I'm like, what is this about? And the bigger ants didn't seem to mind it. And so I got down on my hands and knees and took photographs and documented it, and basically came to the conclusion that these ants were acting like cleaner fish do, cleaning other fish in the ocean. Cleaner fish will walk up, let me back up. The fish wanting to be cleaned will swim up to special spots where the cleaner fish arrive and do all this cleaning of their body surfaces, even going within the jaws where it's dangerous. And the fish being clean will allow them to do this, and in fact stay in a very rigid positions to let them proceed, and then knock them off when they're done and go away. Well, the ants were doing the same thing. The bigger ants would come up to special cleaning stations, which were basically the nest entrances of the cleaner ant, and the cleaner ants would climb aboard, even cleaning between the jaws where they could have been killed in a moment. And then the bigger ant would knock them off when the job was done. And so why are they being cleaned? What's happening here? Well, we don't know. There's likely to be all kinds of bacteria and things growing on your body when you're one of these bigger ants, because these big ants turn out to be harvester ants that eat seeds, and so they get dustings of seeds on their body, and bacteria and things would easily grow on them. So I suspect that's what's going on there. But in fact, we don't actually know what is being cleaned for most of the cleaner fish either. So both of them are a mystery, but clearly the bigger ants are allowing them to do that, and even making sure that they do that. So it seems to have to be beneficial to both.
No, that's interesting. Do you see that is that done in other animals? I guess, like if you look at chimpanzees, but that's
within the species. Yeah, a lot of cleaning going on in primates. But there are cleaner birds that go on bigger mammals and nibble off parasites and so forth.
Yes, but seeing that in ants is, I think, more interesting at that level.
Yeah, it's more like you see in the fish, in that it's a one-to-one thing involving a particular station and behavior. The birds will just climb aboard any mammal they like and nibble away, and they won't get frisked away. But yeah, so there are likely to be more examples of this around, And you can imagine how it would get started. Basically, as long as you aren't being a pest and you climb aboard slightly and you find some food there, you're just going to keep trying to climb aboard. And as long as you're getting cleaned and getting some benefit out of it, you're more and more likely to let those creatures stay on you. So, I'd like to have some cleaner ants myself. I think, this could be our next step in human evolution. We bond with the ants by letting entire ant colonies swarm up our bodies and clean us off. That would ruin the whole health industry. That would be the next step.
Yes. But you'll continue to keep studying this and see, because you said you're not sure exactly why. It's going
to take someone to do a PhD on this to actually figure it out. They're going to have to look at the biochemistry and all kinds of things.
Yes.
So I'm leaving this to a young up and coming student.
Okay.
Not to say that I'm lazy, but I might be lazy.
But you've just over your time, you've gotten to study. You've continued to study and have done a lot of research, and like you with E.O. Wilson, working under him, and now people working under you. So it's kind of that you keep getting more people to become interested in it and continue to analyze ants.
Yeah, well, you keep people. That's what you want to do. You want to get people, as I say, you got to have a sense of wonder. You have this childhood sense of wonder that makes you want to know things about the world. And basically, what I see now is almost too much, sometimes, of bad news. And, the rainforest is being cut down. And even when I see these stories, even though I am passionate about the rainforest, my brain turns off because there's so much bad news, and you know this story already. My approach is to tell people stories that make them fall in love with it, and then they'll go off and want to save it, not to give them the bad news, but to give them the good news, because I think that's the childhood perspective that I admire, as I say, in the people that I grew up respecting so much, including Ed Wilson, who became, he's the father of the modern conservation movement and a number of other scientific areas. And so he had this sense of wonder that I want to convey to kids, but also to grown-ups. And it's harder in grown-ups because we have so many other responsibilities. It's easy to get distracted. But there's a sense of wonder, and it happens at the oddest times, and it probably happens to me in ways that might not happen to other people. I was in Sri Lanka once, walking in a park, a city park, not an exotic place, but something fell on my arm. And I looked down on it, and it was like the coolest thing you've ever seen. It was like an inch wide with legs that were walking along very meticulously, and a central turret with a bunch of eyes that stuck up from the top. And it looked something like one of those things in Star Wars, the mechanical things that walked along and shot bullets from the front, or whatever they were. And it was like on my arm walking along, and I couldn't pull it off. It's totally attached to me, like solidly, and I'm thinking, this is cool. The average person would have probably panicked.
Yeah.
But I'm having the greatest time because I've never seen this before. I have no idea. And, when you're in your 20s already, as I was then, you've usually heard about all these kinds of things, particularly if you're like interested in nature as I was. You're not going to get surprised too often. And I eventually found out it was a kind of a fly that had lost its wings and lived as a parasite on bats. So this thing fell off a bat in the tree above me and landed on my arm. And made my day. I tell you that we should all experience things like that, but maybe not necessarily a parasitic fly, but something like that is what we need in our lives. Something that surprises us and makes us excited about the world.
Yes, because like you said, I think everyone or a lot of people will gravitate towards the bad news, and whether I don't know if they get something from it, but it's just kind of that doomsday scrolling of the news and bombardment of that information. I think it's important to get people interested in the environment and societies and nature, to just make people make people interested in that and not be stuck on just, obviously, we do have climate change and sea level rise and other things happening, or destabilization in the world, but you have to also focus on the positive things.
And focus on the positive things. So you want to go out and make a difference with the negative things, but not be totally overwhelmed by the negative things. Because that's too often, like you were saying, you summarized it quite nicely there. That's too often what happens. There's a guy, Roy Baumeister, who did a book. He's a psychologist friend of mine. Basically the summary of this is bad news is stronger than good. So every time you hear something bad about a particular country or something good about a particular country, say you hear something good about Iran, which is not very often nowadays, you have to hear it many times before it counters the bad news we hear about Iran. So it's very hard now to imagine Americans thinking anything good about Iran.
Yes.
Even if Iran was a potentially dangerous thing. So you see what I mean? You have to counter bad news with a lot of good news before it actually makes a difference.
And I had another question related to ants and just comparing it to humans and how humans might react or evolve in a situation in terms of climate change. What do you think when there's, in terms of Earth going through different cycles and natural disasters and things? Obviously, for humans, it seems more, I don't know if the word's urgent, but just obviously there's changes, climate change. But for ants, do you know what they're kind of thinking in terms of how they how they navigate with different situations that they have to deal with on their level and how they might evolve?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Ants, of course, don't have the cognitive skills to switch strategies. What mostly is happening with ants is like a lot of creatures, is the world warms. The different species are starting to move up hills to higher, cooler elevations. And there are also a lot of species that are extremely good at figuring out how to live with humans and, in fact, control the environment under our feet. Absolutely, including a number of invasive species. And among those are things like the Argentine ant and the fire ant in the American South and a few other species. A long story, but they're basically extremely good at moving around the world as humans do and just conquering places and taking over. And so it's very unfortunate for me because these are the nasty, annoying ants that enter your kitchen. They're not the native ants. The native ants are actually good for the most part. They aerate the soil. They move seeds to where they can sprout. They even pollinate plants. They get rid of pests. But these world-conquering species, which include things like fire ants that sting badly, ruin our reputation for the ants. So do not blame the ants for everything. The ones that were here originally and they're being driven out were doing the world a lot of good. So we have to, among the other worries we have is the fact that these very aggressive species that in many cases come from Argentina, the world headquarters for invasive species. Have you heard of Argentina? You know, once you've encountered an Argentine soccer team, there's no way of countering them. So it's the same with the ants. There are a number of different species that came from the same area and are very, very good at fighting and warfare.
So you can see that over time we might lose, or there might become less diversity within the ant world, and just ones taking over that are the more
and the ones that take over tend to be harmful to agriculture and do things like kill baby birds in the case of both the Argentine ants and the fire ants and some of these others, and destroy electrical systems. They do all kinds of damage. So I'd take you I take you back into the past where ants were all wonderful.
Yes.
Let's go back 2 or 3 centuries. No, well, maybe not all wonderful. I don't know if all of you want to be attacked by an army ant swarm, but I think it's kind of cool.
It would be cool to see.
I tell you, it is. I'll take you on the trip. We can do it together. We'll just tie you to a tree and wait for the ants to come. Have you read the short story Linnegan and the Ants? There's about a swarm of army ants. Anyway, never mind.
I haven't heard that one. Also, just to change the subject a bit, I wanted to talk about the North Fork a bit, and
oh yes,
see how did you eventually discover the North Fork?
I discovered the North Fork because I went to graduate school on the East Coast.
Okay.
It's a place called Harvard. A lot of very tense academics, very high, motivated, blah, blah, blah. So I wanted to balance that out. So I went to Berkeley, a much more mellow place with equally good academics, and was there for a while and did a number of expeditions to places like Vietnam and so forth. And basically found out most of my work was continuing on the East Coast, either in Boston or up in Washington, D.C. So I decided I should move to New York, which is nicely in between the two, because of a golden rule I have, which is never to live near anyone that can tell me what to do.
Okay.
So this was a safe distance, right? Anybody would have to take me, either fly me or give me an Amtrak ticket to visit and treat me really well for a couple of days.
Yeah.
So right in the center, New York City. But then I found out that, you may have heard of this place, New York, but it's kind of expensive, the New York City area. And
yes.
I was trying to figure out where I could live with my 2,000 pounds of books and minimal furniture. And I look in the New York Times, a paper that they have there, and there was an advertisement for a 4-bedroom house with a barn for $200,000 in Greenpoint, New York. It was a misprint.
Oh.
I called up and it was a misprint, and I tell this to my friend Bob Sasha, who's a National Geographic photographer, and he says you should visit this town. It's actually very cool, and you could go into New York whenever you need to. And so most of the things that happen in my life that are good are pure chance like that. I'm just like waiting around for as I say, the new discovery to walk by when I'm too exhausted to see anything else. And so I go out to Greenport and find this wonderful little village. This was a couple of decades ago when I could still buy a place. And it wasn't that place that I bought. I looked around a bit, but, I've loved the place ever since. I mean, there's this great sense of community here. There's a lot of really interesting people and stories, as you know, because that's what you collect. Some of the people you've talked to live within, a couple blocks of me, and they're just extraordinary people. And, I got to know people like Frank Parita, who had Delate, who was a wonderful person, died a couple of years ago, sadly, and of course Aldo's. But characters like that drive this place, including lots of artists and writers and others. So this gives me a much more sense of community here than when I visit New York, where we're all too busy to even look at each other, right? So that's how I came to be here, and I've enjoyed it ever since. And my wife, Melissa, has now joined me, and we still have a tiny apartment in New York City, a 4th floor walk up to keep us healthy. And she works with NYU Medical Center to keep the world moving and has a real job because I have no idea how to do a real job. So I'm just, as my parents first commented when I told them I was going to do a career in ants, they would go like, is this a real job? I think I somehow convinced them that it was a real job, but any case, here I am and having a great time of it.
Nice. And you mentioned that was a few decades ago, but what did you think of the community then? Obviously, it's changed over the decades, but it still has its character here, and obvious. But I like you said, it was more affordable
It
then.
was definitely more affordable. And so luckily I put all my money into the place when it was affordable.
Hmm.
I've always found it more rational to my brain to put money into a physical location or thing than to invest it. So, I just put the money into the house, thank goodness. And, the character of the place, I think, is still strong. The characters of the people, who comes and goes, changes. Aldo is retired, but
Hmm.
they're doing a great job there at his coffee shop and
Yes.
keeping that tradition going and a sense of community of going there. It's almost too overrun with tourists for the weekend, which is unfortunate for my Melissa because she has to work in the city and come out on the weekend. But, it's
Mm.
also so, things can get a little swamped, which is good for the city. But on the other hand, for much of the year, it's great to be out here in the fall and winter when things are
Yes.
quiet. January and February is a wonderful time to be out here.
Yes. Oh, definitely. And what about the natural environment? Has that always been something that has interest you out here? And I mean, obviously, it's not the same as go, going to India and Yellowstone, but it has its charm, and it's not like you're studying the ants out here, even
No,
though
not
they
particularly. I actually take a break.
you take a
I
break
have
here.
various birder friends that I join, and I like hiking around, but
Hmm.
my mind is usually on the tropics and
Yes.
on these species that form these societies, which are mostly in other parts of the world. So we were just in Iceland and Greenland, and looking at muskox and reindeer, and before that, visited the researchers working on things like lizards and others that you've might have mentioned in passing, unexpected species that form societies in different parts of the world.
Hmm.
I'm an escape artist. I think of something cool that I want to see and then figure out how to get there.
Hmm.
So if you need to escape, just contact me. It's 1-800 escape to the tropics, Mark, anytime.
You're always having trips throughout the year that you schedule to continue observing different animals.
Well, my grant is over, so I have to figure out how to feed myself again. Melissa has the real job, as I mentioned. But, I'm always conniving forward. So
Yes.
we'll see. I'll hopefully come back and tell you more stories at some point.
Yes. No, and then also, if you could just mention, you've written a few books. It was the last one from 2018.
2018, 2019, I forget
2000.
which. That was.
Are you working on a new book?
I'm taking a break from the whole book writing thing. I should be doing something on animal societies, but the book writing thing
Was
takes a number of years.
the
The last
last one was Human
the
Swarm?
human swarm, how our
Yeah.
societies arise, thrive, and fall.
Yes.
So basically, looking how societies function, and there are quite a lot in there about animals too, and what we can learn from animals, and basically looking at human societies throughout history and prehistory. Including groups like hunter-gatherers and so forth, and how
Mm.
societies have transformed to allow bigger and bigger populations to live together pretty cohesively, but
Hmm.
in a strained way. It's very complicated, our societies.
Hmm.
We can have a number of different types of people with different identities and yet still have an umbrella identity that holds us together, but that can be constantly challenged as we see who belongs and who doesn't, is this
Mm.
navigated problem that we often face.
Hmm.
And that kind of thing isn't seen in any other species. It's amazing we do it. And certainly, as someone who raves about the diversity of the states, it allows for all kinds of points of view and creativity to emerge within one society that would not have been possible if it didn't exist.
Hmm. Yes. And just I think what's just looking to the future, I think we've touched on this, but what's one thing you hope people might think differently about the natural world, or perhaps our place within it, after maybe listening to this conversation?
Well, don't think of anything as below us.
Okay.
Think of things as, you know, as being equally interesting everywhere. We tend to look down on things. And when we look down on things, whether it's animals or other people and so on, we put things into a hierarchy, and that causes us trouble. I tend to think of things, it's basically the difference between saying things like ants are like humans versus humans are like ants. These are actually two sentences that make a big difference in the brain. Humans are like ants is an insult. Calling someone an ant is an insult. It lowers things to what we see as the ants level in a hierarchy. Ants are like humans raises ants. Just formulating that, saying those sentences raises ants up to our level. And it turns out that if you give someone who's extremely biased against, say, immigrants, an essay on something like ants are like humans that raises up ants, they think more positively of immigrants after reading that essay because it's reduced the hierarchy. It's brought up the animals to our level.
Yes.
It's actually a psychological twist, and it doesn't last forever, of course. The biases still come back after a while, but this potential of seeing us as part of nature and in a sense equal to it and not above it,
yes,
I think strengthens our view of nature and each other.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think differently, like you said. No, that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
No, but I think that was great, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your story and all the research you're continuing to do. It's really fascinating, and hopefully we can have you back on to discuss some more topics.
Yeah, Chris, no, I'd be delighted to. It's all about stories. Life is about stories.
Yes.
Tell me a story. So that's what you've been doing here, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 242 with Mark Moffett. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.